Hey guys, it's Justin again with another episode for the Work in Progress series, or the Start to Finish series, I'm sorry. This is episode 2 for season 2. We're working on the SD Resin Sazabi, this one to be specific. Last time we basically went over the bare basics of what you're going to get into with resin. We separated the pieces, we counted the pieces, we cleaned the pieces. So now we are going to just go over some basic stuff as far as separating everything and getting ready to, well, we're going to go into cleanup of the kit. So, well, the first stage of cleanup anyway. Resin is a very time-consuming process when it comes to cleaning. So, you've got a million pieces laying right here, and you don't know what to do with them. And it's quite daunting at first to just kind of sit down with all these parts and even think about just assembling it. But that's where the next part comes in. What I like to do is separate everything by assembly. So what I mean by that is the instructions separate assembly into 4 steps. I'm going to break it down a little further than that. The head and the chest pieces are all going to go into one container. So I've got these little plastic Tupperware containers. And what I'm going to do is basically pick through them and get all the pieces to the head and the chest and put those inside of this. And then in the next container I'm going to put, oh shoot, I forgot about the waist. I guess I'll put the waist and the backpack in the same container. The legs will go in their own container. The arms will go in their own container, and then the accessories will go into their own container. So everything is going to be separated pretty well, with the exception of the backpack and the waist, but that's fine. Now this is one of the more time-consuming parts of the entire process, but it makes the actual cleanup a lot easier because you don't have to fiddle around with, either just mass cleaning and, what am I saying here? Fumbling around with parts. You can just kind of, you separate everything how you want it. And then, when it comes time to actually clean it, you know what's there. So, I'm actually going to use the same method as before, where I check these off so I know what I'm missing, so I know what I'm looking for. As I go through this, so that I can get everything put into the proper containers. Where's the other one? Another thing I might want to note is that sometimes the Purple Power leaves a little bit of like a residue behind on your pieces. It's not anything major, you can wipe it right off. Which you will, as you go through it. Oh, I'm hungry. But I'm going to go ahead and blast through this really quickly. So I guess I might actually just leave this part on for a little bit so you can see part of it, and then we'll, no, we're not. We're just going to, I'll just cut when this is all done. You can see what everything looks like in containers. So I'll see you in a little bit. Okay, so once everything is cleaned and sorted and all that, this is where things start to get easier, or in some cases more difficult. You begin the part cleaning process of your build. Now for this, I like to use assorted lower grit sandpaper, so I picked this up. It's got a 220, 320, and 400 grit sandpaper. And the only reason I use such low grit sandpaper is because if you look at some of these pieces, this one's a good example. Right here, there's this huge gate mark. And it's on a flat surface, so it's going to be pretty easy to get rid of. But, you know, for me, after this part, I usually don't need too much instruction. I can typically get through the build the rest of the way with it as it is. I might have to reference back and forth every now and then if there's like an odd piece that I can't really figure out where it goes. But for the most part, I'm familiar enough with the parts and you know what I'm working with that I don't believe I need the instructions any farther. So, but this isn't always true. It's always good to keep them around, so don't throw them away. But you know, it's good practice to try and see what you can dry fit together after you've cleaned all the all the gates off. You know, see what you can dry fit without instruction. It helps with your plastic model building. It helps with your resin model building, and like just general problem solving. So we will come back in a second, and I'm going to show you how I clean these parts. Okay, so once all your parts have been sorted into separate boxes and everything's ready for cleanup, I like to do this one part at a time. I usually start from the bottom and work my way up. But sometimes I like to do the head first and work my way down, or jump all over the place and then put it all together at the end. It doesn't really matter. Whatever is comfortable for you. You don't have to separate your pieces at all if you don't want to. You can just clean them all in a tub and move them to the next tub. However, you know, whatever works best for you. So, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to do the head because I figure that's the most, I guess, notable piece of any Gundam kit. You know, it's a big focal point. People look at the head and things like that. And I'm going to just show you some things that you need to get started with cleanup. Now, the biggest thing is sandpaper. Sandpaper is a must. This is 320 grit. It's really low, and I only use this for gate removal. And then I'll go back later and I'll smooth everything out with a higher grit. This is just a sheet of plot plate, or a little rectangle. I only use this in case I'm doing a flat surface. I accidentally sent my friend John my files. So unless you're, you know, using like a bastard file or, you know, something, giant files with smaller pieces, I mean, you can do it, but if, like, it's just not as comfortable, you know, a giant file against something small. It feels more like you're going to break it than, you know, smooth it out. So I like to just use the sandpaper for this. A pair of cutters, probably not the nice ones that you use for cutting your plastic pieces, and a knife is always nice to have around. Another thing is, since resin is toxic, when you sand it, you're going to get particles in the air. Get a mask, and I also recommend wet sanding. I don't have any water with me right now, otherwise I would be wet sanding, but we'll skip it for this time. Wet sanding is just wetting your sandpaper as you sand, and that helps kind of clog up the airbrush. Wow, the sandpaper with the dust particles, rather than getting them all in the air and potentially into your lungs. Now, this is probably not the best mask to use for this, but it's just a dust mask. I use it for when I sand resin. Otherwise, if I'm painting lacquers or something like that, I'll wear my respirator. which is a little more heavy duty. It's actually a lot more heavy duty. So I'm going to put this on and we will get started. Okay, so the first thing I like to do is I like to pick a good starting point. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but for this I'm going to go ahead and start with the cradle. Now the way this works is this piece will plug into this piece here. So this plugs into the neck, or like the cockpit area. So we're going to clean the gate off of this. And the way we're going to do that is by trimming the excess. If it's small bits of flash, you can just trim it real close. But if it's larger pieces like this, I like to trim it a little farther away. So, you know, maybe something like that. And then come in a second time and cut it. That way it's not like right up on it, but it's pretty close. And no matter what you want to do with your sandpaper, you want to fold it over. But since this is on a flat surface, we're going to use the plastic piece. And we're just going to sand that smooth. And that's basically it. So that piece is not ready, but you know, the gate's gone. So now you'd also come in where that piece had the flash on it and sand that away. Otherwise that'll look real nasty when you're painting it. Plus it kind of extends up into here a little bit. But once that's gone, you'll move up to the next piece. This one's a round one, and the gate again is on a peg, so you're a little lucky on this. Just trim it off. Get your block or your file or whatever you're sanding this with. You want to just try and keep it as flat as possible. There you go. And then you plug that in. And it fits like a glove. Now, the next piece that plugs onto that will be this little eye sensor piece. That goes on over here like this. Now, it fits on right now, but there's still gate marks on the back of the things here. So we're going to be very careful about these. We're going to try and get them in one cut so that, you know, so that they're gone. And since they're rounded, we're going to try and fold our sandpaper a little bit and kind of gently sand it with the contour of the piece, just so that we don't mess up the shape. Because if you just sand it back and forth, there's a chance you'll flatten it out and you'll remove all that detail. There we go. So that's ready. And again, as you're going, you'll want to also inspect these pieces a little closer and make sure that there's no weird deformations with the parts or anything like that. Sometimes you'll get weird, like jaggy marks or just irregularities. And I'm sure one of these pieces will have one, so I can show you what I mean by that. Now, next is probably the face mask. Is probably the best way to go. Now, these are one of the trickier gates to deal with. If I can zoom in. It looks like it kind of goes into the piece, but it doesn't. If you look very carefully, you can see that it kind of stops and goes into the bottom. It's like an undergate. So, you'll cut it like that, and then I like to cut it not right up against the piece, but pretty close on both sides. And once again, with the plastic block, we will sand it smooth. Not quite. And smaller pieces are a little harder to work with sometimes because they're hard to get a good grip on. But I guess that's as good as it's going to get for now. Do one more pass on. There we go. And that will plug in right here. Now these pieces have kind of strange gates. Not this one, but these two in the helmet. They're kind of just like that one, but since these are also curved, you just have to take extra special care of how you get rid of the gate. So once again, just like last time, we'll trim it down like that. And this time I'm just going to kind of go in without the block. And actually, I think I'm going to use my file on this one because of how large the gate is. This will help me trim down a lot more of the excess faster. I try to go in one direction so that it stays flat and uniform. It's actually not working out very well. So we'll just use the sandpaper. But you just want to keep sanding at it and it'll eventually even out. Now that I've kind of gotten rid of a lot of the excess, I'm going to trim it a little more with this. Now I can sand away that little bump. And you want to be careful when you do that because it's really easy to cut too far and it's really easy to cut into your piece. So you just want to watch out if you do decide to go that route. But we're pretty much almost done with this piece. You see how the smaller pieces take a little longer sometimes. But there we go. So the gate's been cleaned off of that, and this will plug into the side over here once everything else is done. Now the last piece we're going to touch on is going to be the helmet. Now the helmet has gates here on the sides as well as here on the back underneath the thing. Fortunately, this one isn't too thick, so we're going to actually just trim it real close. Try and get the corners so you don't break it. Now that's another thing that can happen is if it's a larger gate and you try to trim the whole thing, it can split and cause damage to the piece as well. So once again, you're going to want to take your time and be very careful when you trim these. Try and trim like little corners off and work your way into it so you don't actually damage it. And then you can kind of come in here like this and get the rest of that. Now because this is on a flat piece, we're going to use the plastic thing again. And I'm going to just try and go ahead and so we've got most of the gate down. I'm just going to go in here and this is where your knife comes in. You can kind of get in here and kind of trim that away on the underside there. That way it's, you can see where it is. So we got a little bit more to go. And you can see it a little bit right there, so it's not very much left. And that's pretty good. So now we'll just take this and run along this edge to kind of bevel this out a little bit so that it looks natural, where we sort of deformed it just a little bit. But that's good to go. So the inner gates are pretty much standard fare. I like to cut them in the middle a little bit. Just cut the middle piece out. And I'll cut the smaller piece of gate off. And then if I can get some sandpaper in there, I'll do it. Yeah, so then we'll just take the sandpaper and go ahead and tackle that like so. And you can also use your knife for smaller nooks and crannies like this. Sometimes it helps a little more to have like an edge than sandpaper. You can just kind of scrape away the excess. And there we go. So now that that's there, we can actually, that's weird. We can just plug this into the top here. Like so. And then we've got the top of the head. So then we just take our little earpieces and we put those on. and they fit right in. Mouthpiece will also fit right on. You'll want to put that on first because it's got the little tabs for the ears, and the ears actually plug into that and lock everything into place like it should be. So there we go, something like that. And it makes sure the faceplate doesn't droop or anything like that. But as you can see, we have a semi. You know, you can make out what it is or what it's going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and finish cleaning these pieces, and then we will get into how you dry fit. And that's basically just a test fit to make sure all the pieces fit together the way they're supposed to before you commit to pinning or come up with a battle plan for how you're going to go about the cleaning or the you know, the actual build of the kit before you paint it. You know, some people like to you know, just go ahead and paint and then glue their pieces together, which is fine. But most of the time when you're working with resin, you're gonna want to go ahead and pin because it'll give you a little bit more stability. But like I said, I'm gonna go ahead and do this real quick, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So I'll see you in a minute. Okay, so once you've cleaned all your pieces, you can kind of build as you go if you'd like, or you can clean everything and then put it all together at once. It doesn't really matter, just work how you're comfortable. You know, you'll want to start test fitting your pieces. You can do this with Blu Tack. I think I mentioned this before. But the problem with using Blu Tack is there's going to be like a gap between your pieces, so you're not really going to be completely sure of the alignment. The way I did this one, this is the first time I did this, but I've heard that you can do it since it's resin anyway. I actually super glued all these pieces together, so just use a dot, not a lot of super glue, just a dot of super glue on all the bigger pieces, anything that's like kind of loose, and that will lock it in nice and tight. And the way you undo this is you simply you either you know, apply a tiny bit of pressure, and you can just kind of pop the super glue off, and the pieces will come apart. And you want to be incredibly careful with this because you can break your pieces. But alternatively, if you don't want to do that, you can just soak the pieces in Purple Power, and that will undo the glue, and then, you know, you're back to where you were. Now, again, I normally wouldn't super glue this, but most of the pieces are pretty large, so I didn't encounter any errors or issues or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is probably break this down by piece, like break the legs off, break the arms off, break the head off, and soak each piece individually one last time to make sure all the mold release and all that good stuff is off, and get all the super glue cleaned away. And then in the next video, we will go over pinning. Pinning is something you do to add some structural integrity to the model you're working on. It will also, you know, hold everything in place a lot better than glue, especially if you're painting. Well, I mean, you typically need to paint resin kits, but you know, when you're painting two surfaces and you have to glue them together, you're gluing two layers of paint together rather than paint or gluing the two surfaces themselves together. So pinning kind of adds a little bit more strength to that because you actually be able to create a bond between the two pieces. So I'll explain that in the next video. That's probably one of the lengthiest parts of the entire process is pinning. But once you get it down, it just becomes a time-consuming process versus a difficult process. It's not really hard at all. The hardest part is getting your pieces aligned and making sure that everything fits together how it should. But I'll show you some ways that I get around that. So I guess this is a good stopping point for this video. Like I said, next time we will talk about pinning, and I don't believe there will be anything else to talk about besides pinning in the next video, so expect a pinning tutorial.
I don't know if I've done that yet or not on my channel, but here it comes. And then after that we will go into paint, which you all know how to do that based on my last tutorial series, but it's always fun to go over it again, especially with a different medium. Even though this is a robot, it's a different material, so there's different types of, you got to make sure your surface is well kept. So I'm going to end this one here, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Later.